Well, you might as well call the Minnesota Twins the Cleveland Browns, because when they spend a weekend in Pittsburgh, things do not go well. Hello and welcome to the Twinkie Town Tavern, where the beer is cold, the Twins talk is hot, and the stools are always open. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski, inviting you to grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk about a disastrous weekend from Pittsburgh for your Minnesota Twins. Here's how it happened. Game 1, here we come. Cody Clemens welcomes Jared Jones back off the injured list with a solo home run in the first inning, but Pittsburgh strikes back with 3 in the bottom of the first, thanks in part to a Brooks Lee throwing error from third. But the Twins get back into the game and even take the lead with Trevor Larnach's 2-run home run in the third. Pittsburgh gets one back in the bottom of that frame before a stalemate ensues for the next 5 innings. Cody Laureason gets out of a tight spot in the bottom of the 8th, but it's all for naught as Taylor Rogers surrenders a walk-off home run to Brian Reynolds. Twins lose 6-5. On to Game 2. We were due for a Bailey Ober blow-up game, and, well, we certainly got it. He surrenders 6 runs in the second, and the Twins trail 7-1 early. However, incredible fashion, the Minnesota Bats fight back with a 5-run fourth. They tie the game, and for some reason, Bailey Ober is still in the game in the 5th when the Pirates take full advantage on a Jake Mangum go-ahead single. Pittsburgh adds 2 more in the 7th, but the Twins immediately respond in the 8th to stay within 1. The Twins get the tying run on in the 9th inning, but a hard Orlando Arcia lineout and a soft Luke Keeschel flyout ends Minnesota's threat, and the Twins lose 10-9. Finally, Sunday's matinee pits Zebby Matthews against Braxton Ashcraft. Matthews, with his first poor start of the year, allows 7 runs and 4 1/3 frames, and that includes a pair of home runs. Meanwhile, nobody was hitting Braxton Ashcraft in this game. One of the Pirates' many aces strikes out 11 in 6 innings. He gets staked to a 9-0 lead before Brooks Lee finally breaks free with a 2-run home run. Lee adds another long bomb in the 9th, but the Twins still needed 6 more, and they lose the finale 9-3. Minnesota drops to 27-33, good for third place in the American League Central. They're 6.5 games behind first place Cleveland and 2 games out of a wild card spot. So let's get into it. Your Minnesota Twins are on a 5-game losing streak, and it has not been pretty to watch so far. Really, on a road trip that was going oh so well. They started off 4-1. They got the sweep in Boston. They lost the first to Chicago, won the next against Chicago, and it looked like, okay, this Twins team is right there, a half game behind the White Sox, ready to start rolling once again. Instead, it is a colossal failure of 5 straight losses, and even more so discouraging is a loss of a third of the Twins' rotation that happened over the course of this past weekend. So, where are the Minnesota Twins at right now? It is an incredibly odd season, to say the least, where we go cold, and when we're cold, we are ice cold. We are ice cold like the homemade ice cream that me and my kids made today. We're shaking up the salt and the ice, and you need to have oven mitts just to keep your fingers from freezing. That is the amount of cold, the amount of frigidness this Twins team is when things start to go bad. They don't go bad in a haphazard sort of way. They go bad all the way down. Now, on the opposite side, they've been pretty good when they haven't been in those big ruts, and they are almost as equally hot during those times as they were cold in the bad times. So it's a team that is very, very streaky, and right now it has got them right about at 500, give or take, obviously, the 6 games. So what can they do? What can we expect from this Twins team the rest of the way? Because we're only 2 games out of a wild card spot, and it's an American League that is pretty crowded all the way around. There's really no one separating themselves. Maybe, Tampa Bay and the Yankees are probably the top of the totem pole so far in the American League, but either of those has a bad series, and they quickly come back down to earth as well. The Twins need to keep playing this head above water sort of baseball in order to give themselves a shot at being relevant by the trade deadline. And at that point, we can truly see if the new owner, Tom Pohlad, can put his money where his mouth is and start to really invest in a team that has the chance to be competitive. But it all relies on the guys on the field, a lot of whom, especially in the lineup, have had good seasons all around, especially in the rotation, have had great seasons all around, but for better or for worse, still have a losing record here during the 2026 season. And by watching this series against the Pirates, it really had me thinking that even though the Twins were swept, these are two teams that are not all that different, not so far apart, where the Pirates are probably, they have the strength that is their starting pitching, and that is also the strength of the Minnesota Twins. Now, I'm not going to get all the way out ahead of myself and take crazy pills and say that the Twins' rotation and the players that they have stacks up well with the Pittsburgh Pirates, because the Pirates have one of the best rotations in Major League Baseball. You got Paul Skeens. We saw what Braxton Ashcraft can do. Mitch Keller is a very solid veteran arm that I've been wanting the Twins to trade for since the end of the 2023 season. And he's their fourth or fifth guy. And then Jared Jones, who always had the potential to be an ace, he finally makes his return after having that brace surgery and missing all of the 2025 season and missing almost 2 years of real MLB play. They have all of that, and the Twins have good pitchers, but probably none as of right now to that caliber, but still all-star caliber pitchers. They also have a couple of stars in the lineup, and the Twins lineup, I would say at this point, probably gets the plus over Pittsburgh. But Byron Buxton, you have your star guys like Ryan Jeffers puts up good at-bats, but then it's kind of surrounded by guys that can have good games, but are not going to be relied upon stars. And that's exactly the same case with the Pittsburgh lineup, is they have O'Neal Cruz, who is, basically a faster Miguel Sano with all of the strikeouts he has. He's almost at 100. He might be at 100 now, but he also hits a ton of home runs, and then he also is a lot faster and plays a lot better defense than Miguel Sano ever did for the Minnesota Twins. So he's a better version of that, about the same kind of version at the plate, a much better version on the field and on the base paths. And a guy that has all the potential in the world and finally is starting to find himself a little bit at the major league level on a consistent basis reminds you a lot of Byron Buxton and how his career started and how he finally in 2021 especially really started to break out as a major league hitter. Those are those similarities that both of these teams have. Pirates have the young superstar that they're looking for, but otherwise it is a couple of good pieces up high and then a couple of maybe league average, maybe below league average pieces throughout the rest of that lineup that fills out kind of the bottom 2/3 of your batting order, and it all leads to both of these teams being about league average hitters. The one or two differences that have pushed Pittsburgh to a higher echelon than the Minnesota Twins and have given Pittsburgh a winning record, and right now, I think a spot in the playoffs, if the season ended today, they would be tied. They'd have to have some tiebreaker between them, the Diamondbacks and the Cubs at 32 and 28. But the reason that, despite the similarities on the starting rotation and the offensive lineup, the Pirates have a much better bullpen, and they are much better strategically on the base paths than your Minnesota Twins were, or at least we saw that this weekend, where they continued to run on Victor Caratini and continued to get bases stolen against Victor Caratini. He was having a very difficult time behind home plate, and Pittsburgh took full advantage of that. And Caratini is not necessarily a poor defensive catcher. I wouldn't classify him as above average either, but it's not like we're talking about 2005, 2006 Matthew LeCroy, who goes out and makes Frank Robinson cry because he had to be pulled in the middle of an inning from being the catcher for the Washington Nationals back in the day. That's not the type of guy we're dealing with. These are fast, athletic, and timely base runners for this Pittsburgh Pirates team. well coached by Don Kelly. And maybe we can start to kind of draw the parallels of who was this manager of Pittsburgh last year and what has the key difference been that was holding back a similar team in terms of the roster build. Could it be that it was just Derek Shelton mismanaging the Pittsburgh Pirates last year? And that's why the Pirates now have been able to take a step forward. And that is a step forward that the Twins have been unable to take this year because they now have that barrier of the same exact manager being Derek Shelton. I don't necessarily think that's the case because, I mean, outside of Byron Buxton and Austin Martin, this is not a Twins team that has a ton of speed and can't take advantage of average catchers to below average catchers like the Pittsburgh Pirates are able to do. And it wasn't just the stolen bases. There was also a hit and run in this last game, which opened up the complete left side of the infield on what otherwise would have been a double play ball had they not called the hit and run on that in that scenario to end the inning. Instead, it is a slow trickle through single that ends up scoring a run and continues a long rally by Pittsburgh in that frame. So it is this kind of old school approach to baseball that elevates what is about probably as a whole, a below league average lineup that Pittsburgh has, and elevates them to at least competent and average, and allows a lot more pieces to be in play whenever O'Neal Cruz comes up to the plate, or when Brian Reynolds comes up to the plate and is able to come up and hit a walk-off home run in the bottom of the ninth with his team down a run against a pretty good reliever in Taylor Rogers. So that's one thing that sets apart two very, very similar teams in Pittsburgh and Minnesota. The other thing I would say is the bullpen. And Pittsburgh doesn't even have an excellent bullpen, but they have about a bit above average when you look at the peripheral numbers and kind of the predictive numbers that can give you a good idea of what results should be throughout the course of this season. They give up a 318 weighted on base average, and they give up a 318 expected weighted on base average from their bullpen. So they have a bullpen that's about top 15, top 14 in the league in both of those metrics. It's not a lights out bullpen, but it does enough to not ruin the amount of games that we've seen Twins relievers do. And I think that this Twins bullpen has kind of been the barometer for what this Twins team can do. Whenever the Twins have been in this hot streak or this cold streak, it has coincided with a bullpen maybe not peripherally performing any different than it has throughout the course of the season, but results-wise performing better than it has through any course of the season. I have not broke down the numbers yet. I think that's going to be an interesting experiment to do later on in this week, but I would guess that the factor for the Twins that has been most predictive of their success would be the bullpen ERA this season. And I know that's not going totally out on a limb, but bad bullpen teams have been good baseball teams. Bad bullpen teams have won World Series before. But this Twins bullpen has been so poor and has been kind of relied upon to be the difference maker for the Twins, that when it breaks the whole team. And I think that's kind of what we saw this weekend. And also Bailey Ober with his big blow-up start, like we mentioned at the beginning of the show, where he gives up 8 runs throughout the course of his start, which only lasts 4 1/3 innings and probably should have been shorter. So the bullpen and the ability to run the bases are the two things that separate Pittsburgh from what is otherwise a nearly identical sort of team in the Minnesota Twins, and which is why at this point the Pirates are in position for a playoff spot and the Minnesota Twins are not. So the Twins can certainly learn something from Pittsburgh, from probably a managerial standpoint with Derek Shelton and Grady Sizemore getting more aggressive on the base paths, but also being smartly aggressive and coaching these guys up to be even better base runners, but also from a general manager perspective in getting more relievers onto this team. We saw them start to take a step forward when the Twins were hot just a week and a half ago. We saw Yoendris Gomez really start to pitch well. We saw finally Anthony Banda break out of his slump and Eric Orzi. But now we're getting back to the Travis Adams in the bullpen and Cody Funderburk, who, despite having a decent ERA as a reliever, has struck out just 10 batters and has walked 15 of them. So the numbers say that ERA is probably due to increase throughout the rest of this season. You need to add to this bullpen if it is going to be the true barometer of how good this Minnesota Twins team is. You need to add to this bullpen, and whether that's through waiver claims, whether that is through trades, as we start to see who some of the sellers are. This is a Twins team that is not far off and has a decent enough offense, has a good enough pitching staff right now in the rotation that you cannot just sit on your hands or sell at this trade deadline if things go similar to as they are right now. If you are still within spitting distance of a wild card spot and still technically in the AL Central race like the Twins are right now. 6.5 games is a big margin, but we've seen the Twins overcome bigger margins than that in the past. Obviously not this Twins team, but we saw Cleveland overcome a 15-game margin for the AL Central last year. So it is not completely out of the realm of possibility that the Twins could even get into the AL Central, but they would need the managerial help and they would need the roster building help from Jeremy Zoll, and he would need the go-ahead from Tom Pohlad and the rest of the Twins ownership group in order to make those sorts of moves happen. Excuse my voice today. I've had a little bit of a cold, so still a little bit raspy as we speak on the podcast. So I will be trying to soothe that as this week goes on here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. So that is the mandate now for Derek Shelton. Be more aggressive and get these guys coached up to run the bases to their full potential so that you can do things with the hit and runs and with the extra bases that you're stealing or taking on going from first to third. Doing all of that to elevate your offense from being average to above average, like Pittsburgh has done, and then elevating your whole team by Jeremy Zoll adding some bullpen arms that can be a little bit more competent than some of these failed veterans that we've seen, like Justin Topa, Luis Garcia, and a host of others. I mean, even some of the ones that didn't even make the squad out of spring training, or some of the ones that we've seen have requested their release from AAA recently, like Daniel Altavia. We can't be relying on Eric Orzi if we want to have a chance to get into the postseason. And I like Eric Orzi, but he needs to be a lower leverage guy. Cody Lauriston needs to be a lower leverage guy in this Twins bullpen if they want to have a chance to make the postseason, which is still a tenable goal at this point. Moving on, what we also need is some of our bats to step up a little bit more, I guess. I think we're starting to see Austin Martin kind of fall back to earth. He was 0 for 15 at one point during this road trip before finally breaking through a little bit. He did, with a late hit, I believe, also made a diving catch in right field. So still has the range, still has the base running ability if he gets on base, but his batting average down to 263. His OPS now, I believe, lower than Brooks Lee. And this was a guy that was high OBP, taking great at-bats all the time and putting good contact. And I was almost ready to crown him as the next, better version of Luis Arraez if he could continue to square up balls like he was early on in the season. But now that number has taken a bit of a drop, and he's come back to earth. He has regressed. Josh Bell has not had the hitter who's known for being streaky, has not had these long hot streaks ever since the first couple of weeks of the season. It has been mostly cold streaks and every once in a while getting a couple of extra hits, but he's hitting 220 and he's your designated hitter and first baseman that doesn't provide much in the way of defense for you to warrant having a 220 bat in the lineup. throughout the majority of this season. So Josh Bell has been regressing, and then Tristan Gray, one of the three seemingly, I would say, redundant infielders that the Twins have. I think you probably only at most need to have two of those guys between Tristan Gray, Ryan Kreidler, and Orlando Arcia, and sample size be damned, I'd say right now the odd man out would be Tristan Gray, because his batting average has certainly taken a hit, and his ability to get extra base hits that we saw earlier in the year, although he did have one in this series, has taken a hit. Those numbers are all going down for those three players, and if this Twins team is to make any sorts of run, it would need those guys to get back to be back to not obviously superstar status, but just being the guys that they were earlier on in the season. Austin Martin was not lighting the world on fire when he was at the top of the Twins lineup against left-handed pitchers. He was hitting good enough to be a competent table setter for this Minnesota Twins team. So we have to get those guys back up and running, and also hope that some of these other players like Brooks Lee, who just had a 2-home run game, do not start to regress themselves. But otherwise, the offense looks like it is in pretty good shape right now, and I'm excited for what the Minnesota Twins can be offensively if they do get some of these prospects off of the injured list and called up at any point during the season, like Emmanuel Rodriguez and like Walker Jenkins. Or maybe you have a resurgence from Matt Wallner or Royce Lewis at AAA, and then you're plugging in some pretty competent pieces into a lineup that, while being kind of pieced together and patched together through the first half of the season, has been able to at least be a league average lineup. You plug in some better pieces to that, and that's another reason why you can have some hope that the playoffs are not a goal that is completely out there for your Minnesota Twins. And before we go, we got to talk about the roster moves that the Twins made over this last weekend, because outside of the diamond and in the front offices at One Twins Way, a lot of moves were made, and that includes Simeon Woods Richardson being not optioned to AAA, but designated for assignment flat out. And a lot of people were surprised by this. They thought, okay, maybe you give SWR a chance in the bullpen, and we saw what I think the plan was going to be, with SWR piggybacking off of Kendry Rojas, but the one time he did piggyback off of Kendry Rojas, there was a rain delay after his first inning of work, so he's already, had that long 2.5 hour delay, I believe it was, and he wasn't going to go back out there to pitch. And then when he was supposed to have the next piggyback off of Kendry Rojas, he had to get a start because Rojas, as we'll talk about in a moment, went on the 15-day injured list with some left elbow inflammation. So that put SWR back into the starting rotation. He lasts just 2 innings. He's now 0-7 with a 7+ ERA. He has not been a good pitcher. He does not have good stuff. There is no peripheral numbers surrounding Mr. Simeon Woods Richardson that would suggest that he is going to be a pitcher that can turn around his season so far, unless something drastic and unforeseen happens. So everyone knew that SWR was probably on his way out. Maybe give him a bit of a longer leash at the bullpen, but you did not have to completely take him off of this 40-man roster. You could have optioned him down to AAA, but instead they release him outright, and some have been a little bit more up in arms about this move because of some of the wasted potential that you think you might miss out on, but I actually am a fan of just being rid of Simeon Woods Richardson once and for all, because he does not have the stuff that can play in a major league bullpen. He is Bailey Ober with worse command and maybe a little bit better of a fastball, but his stuff is not that much better or better at all, for that matter, than Bailey Ober. And Bailey Ober at least knows where to throw his pitches and doesn't usually miss, outside of the rare blow-up start that we saw over this weekend. But those blow-up starts and those misses are in every start occurrence for Simeon Woods Richardson. And the age, to me, doesn't really matter. He's 25 years old, yes, and has perhaps the potential to fix some of his pitches and get in the lab and become a better pitcher. But this Twins pitching staff under Pete Mackey has had now 3 years with Simeon Woods Richardson, and none of those pitches have gotten markedly better. And he's still basically the same guy, now just with not as much command and now giving up a lot more hard contact than soft contact that he was earlier in his career. And when you have a player that is that mercurial, one, I don't think that's the guy that you want in your bullpen, despite this Twins bullpen not being at its best. Some of those players at least have good pitches to work with, like Eric Orzi, who we mentioned earlier, with that really good splitter and a fastball that he has a little bit more command over. And there's really no reason to put him in AAA, where you're trying to see what you have with guys like CJ Culpepper. And if John Klein ever goes back down, or if he stays in the bullpen, you want to see him a little bit more than you want to see a starter that you've seen pitch at the major league level for 3 seasons now, or 2.5 seasons, however you want to put it. I think for Simeon Woods Richardson, if he was going to have success with the Minnesota Twins, and success being defined as getting into the lab to have better movement on his pitches, to have better pitch modeling altogether, and if he was going to find better command with the Twins, it would have happened by now. And if it hasn't happened by now, it will not happen with the Minnesota Twins. And that's the caveat that I would use. They've been able to have their hands on him to mold him like clay for now 2.5 seasons, and nothing really has changed. The pitching staff hasn't changed in Simeon Woods Richardson's time here, and unless the Twins go really drastic in the middle of the season, it's not going to change under Derek Shelton, who I assume has a leash of at least a couple of years with the Minnesota Twins. I think if Simeon Woods Richardson ever lives up to any whatever potential that he had, or at age 25 can remake himself into a more valuable asset out of the starting rotation, I don't think it would be with the Minnesota Twins in any circumstance, in any simulation, in any sort of reality. I think it would be with the team that can get a fresh look at him. So I think if your options are to try and keep molding him at the AAA level, I don't think that was going to work. And I think the best chance that he would have for success would be to just cut ties with him. And I think if we had kept him, it would be a sunk cost fallacy sort of deal. So by releasing him, this now gives us our best chance of success so that he's not roadblocking anyone at either the AAA level or the major league level. So I think it works best for the player and best for the team in this situation by just plain outriding him, giving new, fresh eyes an opportunity to try and work with him to become better than he currently is. And hopefully for Simeon Woods Richardson, he does become a better pitcher. And if that happens, I don't think we need to lament that as Twins fans necessarily, because I don't think that was something that was ever going to happen if he had stayed with the Minnesota Twins through the next 3 years, or until, whenever his arbitration eventually ran out. I don't think he would have ever reached that. And I think there's at least a chance that he reaches that elsewhere. Also, Kendry Rojas, we mentioned on the 15-day injured list. So that's kind of a bummer. The left elbow inflammation. Whenever you hear elbow inflammation, it kind of sends a chill down your spine, or at least gets your ears perked up in a kind of ominous sense, because that a lot of times can be just a precursor to Tommy John surgery. Now, we saw it, with Joe Ryan, who left his start with what was originally called a forearm strain or some inflammation, and he was able to come back and make his next start, and he's been even better since that injury scare. But we've also seen things like with Pablo Lopez, where the first day of spring training, he has his bullpen session on one of the first days, and he exits early. It's described as elbow inflammation, and then the next day, he's out for the season. He needs Tommy John surgery. I think maybe with MRIs, we would have gotten that news with Kendry Rojas, but we might not have gotten it with this other guy that is in the Twins starting rotation. So maybe we've dodged the bullet with Rojas, but Bailey Ober also put on the 15-day injured list with inflammation in his right arm, which is his throwing arm, in his right elbow. So that means now with both Rojas and Ober out, the Twins' rotation has suddenly taken a major hit. And with Simeon Woods-Richardson out of the picture, unable to take any of those rotation spots, you're now going to be forced to go a couple of different options. One, you could try and bring somebody up from the 40-man or onto the 40-man, select the contract of someone, and actually the Twins did that with Mike Paredes. And Mike Paredes got to see some action in the finale between the Twins and Pirates and looked kind of bad early with a lot of walks and then settled in a little bit more, although still wasn't, I wouldn't say it was a good outing by any means, but was able to stretch himself out. And then you also have Andrew Morris, who's already on the 26-man roster, but had kind of been making himself a fixture in the rotation and had been one of the few bright spots in the rotation lately after his first couple of outings out of the bullpen, I should say. After his first couple of outings out of the bullpen, he kind of was extended a little bit more into 2 or 3 inning stints, and towards the end of those 2 to 3 inning stints kind of ran out a little bit, so they limited to the 1 inning. But now you'd have to stretch Andrew Morris back out. Mike Paredes doesn't have the best stuff, and you're kind of left in a little bit of a tough spot for Minnesota for that 5th rotation spot, because right now it goes Joe Ryan, sweet, Connor Prelip has had some good stuff, has had some bad outings, but I think the stuff is there, and it plays at the major league level. Zebby Matthews, same sort of deal, has mostly been good, just one bad start, and his stuff certainly plays at the major league level. And then Taj Bradley. We don't know when Mick Abel's coming off of the 15-day injured list. Maybe that's coming soon, and Mick Abel just reassumes that 5th rotation spot without much of a transition at all. But he hasn't had any rehab starts, and the Twins are a team that kind of likes to take the rehab assignments a little bit slowly and build these guys up before bringing them back into the rotation. So I think that would be a little bit more uncharacteristic of this organization if Mick Abel was brought in fresh off the injured list and into the Twins rotation without having seen any starts at AA or AAA to get him ramped back up. So I don't think it's going to be Mick Abel. I don't think it's going to be Andrew Morris, because you're kind of having to reverse your plan with him, which was a reversal of your original plan, which was to keep him stretched out so that he could be a starter if called upon. But then all the starters were staying healthy, all the starters were looking good, and so the new plan was, okay, have him go just 1 inning at a time, and he can be a very, very good reliever at the major league level. And if we want to make him into a starting pitcher, we can do that, work on that in the off season. But now he's not stretched out. He would need probably just as much time as Mick Abel would need to get re-stretched out. Mike Paredes is probably going to be your de facto number 5 guy, just depending on how the rotation spots shake out and the timing of it. Coming off the 3, obviously, the 3 inning start here, he would probably take Bailey Ober's over, so he would maybe he would be down a day of rest for his first start because he threw a ton of pitches today. He might only have the 4 days of rest, and wouldn't have a full go through the rotation before it was his turn, but I think he's your most likely option because he's the guy that's the most stretched out at this point. He was a starter at St. Paul, did come in some games for relief and put up some decent peripheral numbers, and his was the contract that was just selected onto the 40-man roster. He was not a guy that you had to call up because he was already on your 40-man roster. He was a guy that you specifically chose to be the next pitcher on this Twins team. He's not a hands tied. We don't have any other options. He was, okay, we're going to now clear a 40-man space by getting rid of Simeon Woods-Richardson so we can put Mike Paredes, who we, I guess, think is a better option, and we will see if that is the case. Now, his fastball was at 94, but again, that was out of a relief appearance in this game. I think it's Mike Paredes taking over for Bailey Ober for at least these next 3 starts that Ober will miss with this injury, if not more, for an inflammation injury that can kind of be a little bit more unpredictable. And we'll see if an MRI comes in the coming days when this team returns back to Minnesota. And if that MRI is positive, great. It still could be 5 or 6 starts before we see Ober back. And that could be 5 to 6 starts of Mike Paredes. So all I'm saying is prepare yourself for that for the coming future. as long as McAble, hopefully he is on his way, because I would much rather have McAble than Mike Paredes. All right, up next for your Minnesota Twins, they take on the Chicago White Sox. They are back home after a 10-game road trip. The Twins are on a 5-game losing streak. The White Sox, unfortunately, on a 5-game winning streak, and they are just a bit behind Cleveland for first place in the AL Central right now. The White Sox, I believe, they are 32-28 as well, and they are 32-27, so even better right now, and they have a wild card spot. They have the second wild card spot right now at 32-27. So a revamped Chicago White Sox team that 2 years ago was the worst in Major League history has turned it around and is 32-27 and is coming into Minnesota to try and extend this Twins losing streak. They have not released or announced their starting pitcher for the game. It is listed as TBD. The Twins have. It is Joe Ryan. He's 3-3 with a 2.94 ERA, and as we mentioned before, has been really, really good since that injury scare earlier in the season. So hopefully that will remain the case, that he will stay very, very good in this start against the White Sox, and hopefully this Twins team can snap that 5-game losing streak and get back on to the hot side of the pillow. If that is able to happen, we are back in business. If this losing streak continues, we're going to be a little bit more worse for the wear. So we will have that game for you coming your way. The recap of that one tomorrow. You can find it here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. And that is currently going to be your last call for Twins Talk this evening. Thanks for pulling up a stool and joining in on the conversation here at the Twinkie Town Tavern. We'll see you back here after the next one. Go Twins!